So, when looking at a community that lives out shared life and shared mission, I think the Four Cs operationally, this is the bread and butter and does a pretty good job corporately. So, the key is when drilling into the details of exactly how we've discerned to live this out as a body, I think there's a lack of delineation and clear focus on in terms of bullet points 1, 2, 3, 4 on family unit submission to Christ, reconciling to God and one another, and using what the Lord provides. How can each group of people best do that? The congregations, the ministers over the congregations, and then the shepherds of the conference in terms of home office leadership and regional pastors. And I think that some of this, we've already covered some of those areas in prior videos, but to drill down into areas where we haven't touched on the Park Street situation, in terms of submitting to Christ as the host, and I've gotten a little bit of this impression even outside of the Park Street situation, but it appears that there's, in terms of bringing others to the table, it seems that in some cases, the Four Cs, I mean, as a conference that rightly brings Four Cs ministers together, there can be a sense of the people at the table are the people serving and not necessarily the people who, in theory, are being served. And I think that came through pretty loud and clear in terms of both posture and process in the Park Street situation, because while the congregation was nominally consulted and sure every email was read and every material was read, it, the actual treatment of the content of what people said was fairly dismissive and hand waved away or even treated as malignant in some cases, or and at least that's my impression. So is that bringing the congregation to the table? And I'd say not. And what does it mean to healthily bring the congregation to the table when there's messiness and division? And maybe it's not the Four C's job to do that. Maybe it's the church's job to figure that out, and the Four C's can provide some frameworks specific, instead of specific, essentially rulings on how right or wrong the congregation is on some in terms of perceiving something. So take that for what it's worth. And then in terms of using what the Lord provides, being a little more direct, there were shared gifts through the Spirit that were claimed and didn't exist, or couldn't actually be backed up in terms of reality, and in terms of credentials, in terms of skills, in terms of experiences. That was true of both the person under investigation and those doing the investigating. And so the reality there is that was just, this value was not reflected in the Park Street circumstance. So I would again submit in this case, I think it's how can we define the focus and clear delineation of responsibilities in what is admittedly a messy and non-uniform conference that, just by its structure, not by anybody's fault. It's just when we choose to do congregational polity, it's messy, and having these different layers, I think some of the ultimate vision is seems to be lost. So that's something that we can discern together how to improve.